All right, we are recording. Let me go into the deck. So yeah, thanks everyone for coming to this Power Premium session. This is one I've been wanting to give for quite a while. It's one of the most favorite projects I've worked on across my career, and it really showed a lot of the senior and staff behaviors I've talked about with many of you, both in person and across Taro, whether it's through the videos in Taro or the Q&A. And it was really the amalgamation of like many different things coming together. And I think something that a lot of engineers struggle with is aligning different parties. And this case study has it in spades. So let's get right into it. So the context. Here is the background of my team. So I joined Meta back in May of 2017. I worked on Portal for around a year. That org was thrashier than I would have liked, so I ended up switching organizations. And in summer of 2018, I went to Instagram. Specifically, I went to work on ads at Instagram and try to make money for Mr. Zuckerberg and keep the stock price up. I was one of the first 5 Android engineers in that organization. And across around a year, I grew to a tech lead on that team. So for more context, when I joined, I was one of 3 Android engineers. 2 of the prior Android engineers who had worked on ads had since transitioned. One of them went to WhatsApp and the other one became an engineering manager in the org. So I'm like first 5 across all of history for that organization. My focus was on ads in stories. Back in 2018, stories were really hot. Now it's all about like TikTok and Reels. But stories was growing a lot back in this mid to late 2010s era. And this case study takes place between late 2019 and mid 2020. Yeah, and just to add some context around how the org grew, between when I joined and when this case study happens. When I was working on this Oncall project, we had grown from like 5 or 6 mobile software engineers working on Instagram ads to 20. And before we only had 2 engineering managers, and then now we had 4. So the team grew quite a lot in the year between mid 2018 and mid 2019. So here's the original Oncall. This is a picture I just Googled for Stone Age, and this is, I think, on the Wikipedia page for Stone Age. The reason I brought this up is because the original on-call system that we had was incredibly primitive. So it was a basic router system. Whoever is currently on call will like get issues, they'll get bugs or like SAB reports or whatever. And then they will just like look through the issue and be like, all right, what part of the code base is this probably relevant to? And then they'll essentially like blame the code and then assign it to the owner of that code. So a very, very primitive system. And since it's just a router and you're not responsible for actually fixing the issue, the original on-call actually had both iOS and Android engineers. Because like if you're an iOS engineer and you get an Android issue as the on-call, it's fine. You just assign it to the Android engineer who owns the code. And this is generally what a lot of teams will start off with as their on-call. For context, this on-call generally works when a team is very, very small, because everyone kind of like knows like they're part of the code and there's very strong ownership and people haven't left the team yet. So for startups, I think you don't really need a super fancy on-call system. But yeah, as organizations grow, as companies grow, it doesn't really work anymore, which I'll dive into in the rest of the presentation. Yeah, and this ended up being pretty bad because so as I talked about before, there were engineers who had worked on the Instagram ads code base, and they had since like stopped being engineers on Instagram ads. Either they switched organizations or they became engineering managers. So there was code that wasn't explicitly owned. And with the hyper growth of the org, as the teams reorged, there were these like legacy pieces of code that would still generate ads revenue, but it didn't have clear owners. So what we would see happen a lot is you would get bugs related to these swaths of the code and no one owns them. So people would just kind of like hot potato them around and be like, oh yeah, like this engineer wrote the code, but you like reviewed it like 3 years ago. So like you own it. And then this person's like, well, I barely remember reviewing this person's diffs three years ago. So I don't know how to fix the bug. And they'll hot potato it to someone else for some random reason. So I remember we had issues that would go unsolved for like 3-4 weeks. And some of them ended up becoming SEVs. For context, SEV stands for severity, which is like a really, really bad production event. And bugs often will fester over time because sometimes a bug will be caught when it's like in beta and there's like 2 million users on the latest version of Instagram, but then like as it gets rolled out to more and more people, the severity of the bug increases and then it becomes a SEV. And in terms of like how to classify things as a SEV, is pretty obvious for like ads. It's just like revenue loss. So like this system was really, really bad. Like it was just so painful seeing like what was initially like kind of a small to medium-sized bug grow into like a giant SEV fire. Yeah, so why did it suck for me? This rock crushing someone's crushing expectations. So at the peak, there were 3 Android engineers who worked on story ads concurrently, but it dwindled down to me due to team churn. Both of them ended up leaving for different teams. So I needed to cover a huge surface area. Like there were essentially 5 engineers worth of code, because there were 2 engineers who I never got to work with. They worked on Instagram, like ads, Android, and just left before I even joined the organization. And then there were 2 who like I was able to work with for like a couple months and then they left. So I had to cover a really huge surface area, and it was just way more than I can handle. And again, with the router system, pretty much anything touching like Instagram ads on Android for stories was assigned to me. And this is like, by this time, Instagram story ads on Android was probably like $1 billion business. So it was like absolutely huge, and it's just one person. And yeah, I was a single point of failure, because if there was an issue, then like I had to be the one to fix it. Yeah, so before we kind of dive into the meat and potatoes of like how the on-call works, let's just talk about like on-call like as a whole. I actually didn't really know much about what on-call means and what a good one looks like until I had to like fix the on-call and go on this journey. And I know a lot of like, especially like junior and mid-level engineers who like aren't like super familiar with what an on-call is. And it's very possible that you could work several years in your career and like not really be part of like a legit on-call. So let's just talk about on-call. So what's the purpose of an on-call? So on-call is a team-wide process built to protect the integrity of a team's systems. And it's especially important in larger companies and organizations. So as I mentioned before, when you have like a smaller place, you don't really need like, you don't really want to be adding more processes. And on-call is a very complicated process. So with any complicated process, you want to be careful about when you add it. So when you have like a larger organization with like a greater surface area of code, you're going to have like all these like places, you just have all these edge cases, right? Where it's like, oh, there's just like this giant feature which was like owned by an engineer, but they've since left the team, and now it's unclear who owns it. And or you have like some engineer who's just like a single point of failure because they've been on the team for a long time and we've touched like, they own like a lot of the code. And if you have a primitive router system like that, it's just, that doesn't work. So when you have like a large organization, you need the on-call to really focus everything and everyone and make the team more resilient, so you can actually like protect the overall system. Yeah, so what's covered by on-call? Yeah, bugs, obviously. So SEVs, like big production events, and then yeah, alerting anomalies. So like if some core metric is down 50% in the past week, someone should investigate why and hopefully fix it. Yeah, and then mechanics. So yeah, on-calls are organized into what's called rotations, and rotations are essentially just lists of software engineers. And how it works, every week, the person at the top of the list is selected to be the current on-call. And they're now the firefighter person, and they're responsible for like fixing stuff. Well, however the on-call works, it could either be they fix stuff by writing the issue or by like actually writing the code to fix the issue. And then yeah, after the week that you're on call, you get shoveled to the back of the list, and then the next person kind of bubbles up and they become on call. So that's how on call works generally. Yeah, bringing people together. So the first step with any like big project, any sort of proposal of a new system, is you have to align all the relevant parties. And again, let's go through some of the background for this section, because context is really important. So I had spent a lot of my time in Instagram ads building up social capital before I took on this project. And I'm going to talk more about this later on in the presentation on why that's important. So when I was trying to fix the on-call system, like at this point, I was already mentoring about 1/3 of all the mobile engineers across Instagram ads. So there were around 20, and I was already mentoring like six or seven of them. So I had a good relationship with those mentees because I was a pretty good mentor. I was able to get engineers promoted really quickly, and I cared a lot about my mentees. And for the engineers, I was not directly mentoring, especially on Android. I was indirectly mentoring them through code review. I always got really good feedback around leaving very thorough code review comments and just like trying to be very empathetic and teach clean code principles. At Meta, everything is logged and tracked, so you could like look up at any time in this tool called Team Insights, like how many code review comments you've left and like the average length of each one. And I always had the highest for both. I always had the most code review comments and the longest average code review comment. Yeah, I onboarded almost every new mobile engineer that joined Instagram ads. And I focused a lot on the senior and staff engineers because this is straightforward. If you help onboard a new senior staff engineer, they're going to have much higher impact. Yeah, and I just in general had a stellar reputation concerning code quality, not just like the diffs I would put out, but I also had a good reputation around caring a lot about bugs. Like whenever I got a bug, I would do my best to like own it and fix it and come up with a fix that wasn't hacky. And I would always put together a really detailed list of steps whenever I went through a tricky bug of like, this is how I figured out the bug. This is like how I did the blames, and this is how I figured out the service I was breaking, et cetera, et cetera. So I had a lot of respect around like Alex just does things right at this point in time. And this is all going to be very important in my ability to persuade others with this project. Yeah, so the genesis of fixing on-call. So start off with me complaining. I'll complain to my manager. I was like, I'm getting like all the bugs for Instagram story ads, Android, and there's like a billion of them. And it's like taking up like anywhere from 25 to 50% of my bandwidth. And it's just really hard for me to ship roadmap projects. And I suggested the very naive solution of like, can we just like hire more people to work on story ads for Android? And my manager's like I could do that, but that doesn't actually solve the problem. Like, first of all, it takes a while to hire someone, someone good. So like you're still going to be struggling for like, 1, 2, 3, maybe 4 months, after that. And the same problem could occur. Like you could hire someone and then, yeah, maybe like they leave after a year or something, because switching teams happens a lot at Meta, and you're still on this team because you love it, and then you're back at square one. So she pushed me to solve the problem at a more systematic level. And she said, like, Alex, you should just fix the entire on-call system. Like, it's pretty bad. So that's the path that she put me on. So yeah, this is one of the reasons why like the manager I had during this time at Instagram is I consider the best I've ever had across the 11 managers I've had. Like she started a thread with the 3 other engineering managers that owned Instagram ads products, and our lead staff engineer on the product side. And yeah, like she mentioned that we were pretty bad at fixing mobile issues with Instagram ads, and everyone agreed. Like again, like we were all painfully aware of those issues that would burn for like 3 or 4 weeks and not get resolved, and some of them turn into sevs. And then there's just like, yeah, Alex is on point to fix this. So this was a nice forcing function for me to like actually follow through and fix this thing. So I think this is a very good example of like good engineering manager behavior. Like she made the initial connections, but like didn't really like hand hold me through it. Like she just pretty much got the ball rolling and kind of like was like, oh, here's like this scope, and I mean, like I'll have some guiding like lights, I guess, to help you, but like 95% plus of the work you need to do it. Yeah, so another thing that my manager mentioned was like there are other parts of Instagram ads that have really great on calls, and you don't have to reinvent the wheel. And she mentioned 2 teams in specifically. There's ads delivery infra, and then there's like the backend rendering, which is like the API layer. So yeah, I just scheduled one-on-one meetings with those tech leads. Like a big reason why I stayed on Instagram ads for so long. I was on Instagram ads, that organization, for 3 years. It's the longest I've ever been on a single team. And a big reason is like people in that org were all really nice. So like these tech leads were very happy to take my meeting. I think everyone is just always happy to take other people's meetings. Yeah, and I made sure to really do my homework before the meetings. I read through their on-call docs, very closely beforehand. And as I talk with them, I just make sure to take like a ton of notes. And this is pretty much how I created like 70 to 80% of my on-call proposal, because what they were doing was already working. Again, no need to reinvent the wheel. So a lot of it was copy pasta. Yeah, and then scaling myself. So it was clear to me that Android and iOS had to be split up into two separate on-calls. Having an on-call with 20 engineers, not a good idea. It's too big. And of course, like Android and iOS are like different. It's not super common that an Android engineer would like know how to dig into the iOS code base and vice versa. Like, here's the problem. I'm not an iOS engineer. I was an Android specialist. I mean, I mentored a couple iOS engineers, but I pretty much never wrote iOS code. I reviewed some diffs, but I never wrote any iOS code while I was at Facebook, minus like one random task in bootcamp. Yeah. So what I did was I recruited the two most senior iOS engineers to carry out my vision. I was like, okay, once we split up these on-calls, like someone needs to own the iOS version of the on-call, and I want like you two to do it. Like one core person and then one backup. So one was a staff engineer I helped onboard. So again, like the social capital is important. Like since I helped onboard this person, they were like, they were happy to help me with something, paying back the favor. And the other one was actually my main mentor back when I was at Instagram. So yeah, we had a good relationship. And whenever I was put on a project that she was the tech lead for, I was always trying to do really good work and make her look good. So I had a good relationship with her. She was more than happy to take this on. Yeah, going upstream. So yeah, ads, bugs don't come out of nowhere. We have a group of employees called BPS, Business Production Specialists. So this is another thing I had to do. I need to give them the heads up about the new system. So like for context, like what these folks do is they're kind of the front line of defense with the advertisers. So advertisers will complain and be like, hey, my ad is not rendering properly. The BPS will talk to them, and then the end product is like they will file a bug task, getting the information from the advertiser, and then they'll assign it to an engineer. And this is talking to BPS is very important, because we're gonna be splitting up the on-calls. We're gonna, instead of having just like one Instagram ads mobile on-call, we have to create an Android and iOS one. So tactically, this is important, because what this means is that the BPS, well, first of all, the BPS should talk to the advertiser and be like, are you seeing this bug on Android and iOS? And they would have to get that information. And then after they figure out if the bug is on Android and iOS, they have to assign it to the proper on-call. So this is like a pretty meaty like logistical shift for them. So I went through like some of the old bug tasks, and I was like, okay, who are the BPS assigning it to us? And I got like two names, and then I talked to them, and I was like, by the way, I'm going to be doing this. Here's my proposal. Here's my timeline. This is how the on-calls are going to change. And then whenever I talk with the BPS, I would traverse the graph. I'd be like, okay, I've already talked with like you and like these two other BPS. Like, are there any other BPSs who are involved in like, Instagram ads bugs, who I haven't talked to yet? And then, yeah, I got a couple other names. And yeah, by the end of this process, I talked to like 5 or 6 BPS. Yeah, I think this is just like really important, because like you'll be surprised at how many people are involved in a process, especially at a big tech company. So like being able to really kind of go upstream and downstream and figure out all the relevant people to like whatever you're touching is very important. Yeah, so the proposal, like what did Alex's new on-call look like? So here's the basics. As mentioned before, I split up the on-call, one Android, one iOS, with about 10 engineers on each one. Standard 1 week rotation. So yeah, you're on call for a week. And I stacked the most tenured and senior engineers first, because like they're going to be most equipped to like deal with bugs, because they've either a lot of experience overall, or they've just been on team for a while. I wrote a detailed runbook. Every on-call should have a runbook, which essentially goes like, this is how to be on-call. Like, here's like the tools, debugging tools you can use. Here are links to other on-calls if the issue is like out of your scope. Here's the SLA, which is how quickly you're expected to fix issues. Here are SEV guidelines. This is how you know if the bug you got is like actually a SEV, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, and then another important thing is that being on-call is the highest priority. So if you are on call, you just have to be cognizant that it could take up to 100% of your bandwidth. So like you can continue working on your roadmap tasks, like your feature work, if you are on call. But if you get an issue, you got to put that to the side and then prioritize the on call first. So there's no question about like how to juggle it. Pretty much like If your on-call is chill and you're not getting issues, go ahead, work on your future work. But if you're getting issues, fix them. Yeah. And then this is important because you have to bake it in timeline. So I told all the engineering managers and tech leads and engineers, like, when you're planning out the timeline for a project, like, is this project going to take like 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 8 weeks? And you're on call for one of those weeks, just pretend like that week doesn't exist. So pretty much, like, if you're on call, just like add +1 to your +1 week buffer to your timeline. Yeah. And I think this is where like things really start to change. So the on-call, the new on-call designated, like, the whoever is currently on rotation, they become the ultimate shield for the team and its systems. So this means that when you are on call in this new system that I was proposing, the buck stops with you. And what this means is you're actually responsible for fixing every issue you get end to end. You can't just throw it over the fence and route it to someone else. And the only time you can throw over the fence is if it's not an ads bug. That happens sometimes. Like, sometimes it's like, oh yeah, like they thought it was an ad, but it was actually like organic content from like a regular user, and then you just assign it to the proper team. But if it's an ads thing, and it belongs to you, so your Android on call, you got an Android issue, or iOS got an iOS issue, like, you fix it. Yeah. And then if the bug covers an area of the code you aren't familiar with, learn it. Yeah, and there's no rollover. So like, if you have rollover, what happens is, like, let's say you get an issue, let's say on call, like, starts and ends on Monday. Let's say you get an issue on, like, I don't know, Saturday or whatever, or Friday, and you can't fix it by Monday. If you have rollover, it'll just go over to the next on call to fix it. I decided to do no rollover. I did this after talking with, like, looking at other people's on calls and talking to those tech leads, because, again, it's like all about like preventing dark incentives. So if there is rollover, theoretically, an engineer could be like kind of lazy and just like not really fix their tasks, and then just like let it roll over to the next on call. By preventing rollover, it really reinforces the idea of ownership. Whereas, like, if you got an issue, like, you have to fix it, and you can't just like kick them over the fence because we don't have rollover. So you can't like screw over the next person. So yeah, like, overall, like, the on call got a lot more weight in the new system. Yeah, and like, just wanted to prevent bug hot potato. Like, one of the most frustrating things to me is like people not taking responsibility, and I've seen really annoying bouts of task, like bug task hot potato, where people are just assigning it like back and forth. And I just wanted to prevent that as much as possible, because at the end of the day, I want to ship a good experience to users. And if the engineers are just like constantly playing volleyball with bugs, you're not going to be able to do that. Yeah, so growing together as a team. And I think this is like one of the most important parts of a healthy on-call. So whenever an on-call rotation ends, there's going to be a team retro meeting. So for Android, there's going to be a meeting of all 10 Android engineers. And then for iOS, there's going to be a meeting of all 10 iOS engineers. And that 10 iOS engineer meeting will be run by those two leads I mentioned before. So whoever was like the past on-call, they walk through every issue they got. And they go through like, what was the issue? What was their process for fixing it? And is there anything we can fix at a broader level? So like, maybe we have this issue, but it's like part of a pattern. And there's like, maybe we can refactor a module or rewrite a service or something, so that we can like proactively prevent these issues from happening again. Yeah, and then after we, go through this meeting together and kind of like mind meld on like, how the on-call went and what we can learn from it, then we post those meeting notes publicly. So there was just like a workplace group. It was just like Instagram ads engineering. It was a pretty big group. So this is a pretty public setting. So I think Facebook had a good culture around just like sharing things. So we would post in that group. So you could get a lot of credit from these meetings, because the kind of the output of it was shared to such a wide audience, including managers. Yeah, it's a process. It took a long time. These things take time, especially if you work in a big tech company. So I started off by writing a very thorough proposal document, which included a pretty spaced out timeline, so people would have time to like adjust the new system. I shared it with the initial engineering leads for feedback. So this was just a quick document, and they left some comments here that I incorporated them. And then I held a huge meeting with every mobile engineer. So I had to book it out pretty far ahead of time It's like, this is literally 20 people. I prioritized making sure the calendar was free for like all the tech leads and senior and staff engineers. But I try to get everyone, including like the E3s and E4s. But yeah, pro tip, like if you want to have a big meeting, a lot of projects do require big meetings. Book it out really far ahead of time. And yeah, this was especially relevant like pre-COVID because like you also had to like fight for the big meeting rooms. But yeah, I did it. I had a meeting with, it was like 17 or 18 of the mobile engineers showed up. Yeah, but this was very important, so I wanted everyone to know about it. But yeah, so I posted the initial proposal publicly in a workplace group in November 2019, got more feedback on the post. And then, yeah, I launched it in February 2020. So like 3 months to go back and forth and really fine tune it and make sure that everyone knows like what's going on. Yeah, so I created this table to really illustrate the delta between the old on-call system and the new one. So before, the on-call would just chuck like 95% of issues over the fence. Because again, like most of the time, the code is not going to be something that you are equipped to fix, especially because iOS and Android were merged together. So 50% of issues wouldn't even be relevant to you. And then after, the on-call is actually responsible for like pushing out fixes and like owning issues end to end, like actually coding up everything. Before, engineers could get bombarded with bugs and fires at any time because like it's just a router system. You can always get assigned a bug to like the system that you own. But afterwards, since the on-call essentially is like Captain America and they shield the rest of the team, you have this predictability because if you're not on call, you know the on-call is handling it. And then when you are on call, it is your turn to protect the team. It's very clear delineation of responsibility. Before, the on-call was very individualized with no learning or retrospection, because why would there be? It's just a routing system. It's pretty basic. So there was no like on-call retro or meeting notes or anything. And then afterwards, the on-call became a very communal learning exercise that brought together the entire team and really forced everyone to like look at the health of their system and figure out like how they could improve it. Yeah. And then like before, you got 0 credit for being on-call because pretty much anybody can be a router. You just have to like know how to blame code. And afterwards, on-call became a way to get broader recognition among the organization because like you have the team meeting, right? So like if you're in the on-call meeting and you're saying good stuff, like the leads in that meeting will recognize you. And that could, a lot of the times that would kind of bleed over to your performance review feedback. And the meeting notes are also published. So like if you're on call, you did a very good job, like firefighting a lot of issues and you put out really good fixes for them, you detail your process, everyone can see that. Yeah, so making everyone happy. So when it comes to like any sort of change that affects many people, you have to understand other people's incentives. So there were 2 groups that like were, had some reservations about the new system. The first one were the engineering managers, and the second one were the junior and newer engineers. And I'll talk about like how I like align those groups and really address their concerns. So the first one is engineering managers. And I think a lot of people, they hit a wall in their career growth because they're unable to convince engineering managers of stuff. And this is tricky because engineering managers have a fundamentally different set of incentives compared to engineers. So yeah, like the managers were all thinking like, so adding a new process is expensive. We don't want to add yet another process to slow things down. It's like, what's the delta between the old and new? Like, why is this better? Why does this help me perform better as a manager? Because like, this is going to be a bit harsh, but like generally the engineer well-being is not the #1 priority for engineering managers. Obviously, engineer well-being is a high priority for engineers, but for engineering managers, it's rarely #1. Generally, like #2 or #3, maybe even #5 or #10 if the managers are like not great. But like I think at pretty much any company, managers are responsible for like delivering impact, and that's the #1 thing they're graded on. So a lot of managers will sacrifice like a bit or maybe a lot of their engineering well-being to deliver impact. So this is something I had in mind going to these conversations where it's like, I could mention engineer well-being, but it shouldn't be like the thing that I lead with. So the biggest pull by far when I was pitching this new system to engineering managers was, with the new system, we will be able to ship projects faster and with less thrash because you have the predictability. Like we had so many projects that were randomly held up because like the tech lead just got hit with like these random issues in the previous system because it was just the router, right? You couldn't predict when like a sev would just appear in your system. And then you would just have to like, take like a week off to fix it and just kind of be distracted from your roadmap work. So I had ample evidence of this happening. And this was this is probably the strongest argument that I had, which is like, we'll be able to ship better. And this is the thing that clearly resonated the most. Another thing that they were very happy with, this is actually something that my skip manager called out, is that with the new system, the senior engineers in particular, the productivity really gets maximized because generally seniority is connected with scope of ownership. So engineers that are like senior staff, especially those that have been in the team for a while, like 2, 3, 4, 5 years, they own massive swaths of the code. But there's no way they can fix every single bug with every single module that they own. That's just like not scalable. So they were like, these engineers were essentially being punished for like their broad scope. And with the new system, that wouldn't be the case. Like they would only have to fix the issues on all their systems like when they themselves are on call. I mean, they have a responsibility. If the current on call finds an issue with the senior engineer system, it's the senior engineer's responsibility to like show them the ropes and teach them like, this is how you debug issues here, and then maybe even put it into a runbook for multiplicative impact. But they don't actually have to like do all the debugging and like put out the fix and monitor the fix. So this was like a huge motivator, because generally what happens is engineering managers will have like a tech lead that's like a partner in crime. So like in like generally successful engineering teams, they'll have a EM and a TL, and they have a strong partnership. And then if either one of them is not doing well, then the entire team suffers. So with the new on-call, each EM, like their right hand, like their TL would be essentially have a much higher quality of life and just be able to focus more, which is really important, which really like when the TL does really, really well on a team, generally the EM does well as well. So again, just figure out like the incentives. Yeah, taking care of juniors and newbies. So a lot of people were like, wait, so if I get this issue as on-call and I've never worked with that code before, I have to learn it. That seems really scary. And I totally get that. Yeah, this is something that we had to do to increase the resiliency of the team, because as mentioned before, me and other senior engineers were single points of failure. So this is like, this is the problem another problem we had to solve is the on-call. So yeah, so these engineers were very aware of that learning burden. Learning new things is scary. So here are the steps I took to kind of assuage them and just like tell them like, it's okay. Like you will have the protections you need to actually like survive as on-call. So first of all, I'll put them at the end. So like the initial on-call, I put the more junior folks at the end. And then whenever someone new joined the team, I'll put them at the end. And since we had like 10 people, that's like 10 weeks, like you have 2.5 months to like learn how to be on call, and there's all this material to teach you how to do so. And this is why like on call size is very important, because like if your on call is only like 2 people, then you can't really do this. And because like if you put them at the end, they'll just be up in like 2 weeks. So this is why it's important for on calls I would say like 7 to 12 people is a good spot for on calls to be. Yeah, and there's all these resources. So there's a run book, there's a retro meeting. There's this like team culture around helping each other to learn, and the in-depth write-ups for learning. Like there's all these resources to help you learn how to be on call. So like these new engineers, once they went to their first on-call retro and they saw like the detail in which like everyone like laid out like their on-call, it really made them feel like a lot better. And for new engineers, I could also show them prior on-call notes and be like, look, like you're essentially getting a survival guide on how to be on call every week, and it's like super high quality. There's so much stuff to help you like do well at this. Like I believe in you. And yeah, it more or less worked. Another thing I did was I added a shadow on call. So shadow on call is essentially like a secondary layer where it's like if you're the on call and you get an issue and you're like, oh my god, like this, I just literally can't figure this out at all. The shadow on call is like the first kind of line of support for you. You can like ask the shadow on call to be like, I just don't get it, please help me. So I added a shadow on call to like kind of make the junior engineers on call in particular feel more protected. Shadow on call was actually volunteer only, so it was just like me and another Android tech lead who put ourselves on there. But yeah, like the shadow on call was pretty much never used because like I was right, like the amount of resources we created to help on call and the on call retro meeting was enough. Like everyone was, even the new like E3s on the team, new junior engineering team could figure out like how to be on call because they had 2.5 months and they had all these resources. Yeah, so just kind of like there's a nice Venn diagram of all the incentives. So we have like 3 different groups. We have the managers, we have the senior engineers, and the junior engineers. And you can see like all the different places that like the incentives align, which is why like this proposal was successful, because like I made sure to really find those areas of aligned incentives and then really push those when I was talking to people. So let's go through the overlap first, because that's the most important one. So everyone wants to ship projects faster. Managers want to ship projects faster because like that's kind of their job. And like project impact is a big like performance review indicator for every engineer at any company, especially at Meta. So everyone was happy about that. For senior engineers and managers, they were both very happy that like being senior is now scalable, because like again, now you don't have to fix every friggin' issue that comes in for what you own. You don't get punished for having more ownership. So that was really important to both managers and senior engineers. Between the engineers, the senior and junior engineers, just having less stress was very valuable, because again, like you have the predictability. When you're on call, yeah, your life could suck, but it's a noble purpose, right? You're protecting the team, protecting the system. And then when you're not on call, which is going to be 90% of the time, your life is peaceful and predictable, and you just kind of work on your future work. Yeah, and then a big one for junior engineers and managers, this is more specific to Meta, is that the on-call now shows key signals for promotion. So technical depth, which you show during fixing bugs, counts for something called engineering excellence at Meta. Engineering excellence is one of the 4 axes that engineers are rated on. And it's the most important axis to get promoted from junior to mid-level. And mid-level to senior is, I think, also the most important, but not as important. But still, it's important. And this is really important for Meta because there's forced promotion. There's a process called up or out. So E3s have to go to E4 in 2 years, and then E4s have to go from E4 to E5, mid-level to senior in 3 years. So this this new system essentially like gives a lot of signal to like help you make that promotion. And managers, they don't want to have to lose their engineers because they're not getting promoted fast enough. And obviously like E3s and E4s don't want to get fired by like not getting promoted fast enough. Yeah, so let's launch it. So yeah, putting myself on the line, I volunteered myself to be the very first on-call for the Android portion. And I carried over my previous behavior. I always wrote very, very detailed on-call summaries with clear debugging steps, just outlining like how I fixed everything and just like thought about bugs. I remember like the first on-call, like I was the first on-call in that rotation. I got like 5 bugs, but I wrote like 2 pages of material on like how I thought about the bugs and like next steps after I fixed it and stuff like that. So it's just want to really set the example. Yeah, and then I read every single like, because after the on-call retro meeting, we always like make a post publicly. So I read every single post that was made, across both Android and iOS. I would give props on the good posts. So like a lot of like again like these E3s and E4 junior and mid-level engineers, like it's very important for them to show engineering excellence. So like for those engineers in particular, I would read through their on-call summaries pretty thoroughly, and if they like did really well or like they either fixed a lot of bugs or they really went in depth on certain issues, I would just give them props and even CC their manager. I remember there was this one on-call from one of my mentees, actually one of my fastest growing mentees ever at Meta. He got like some insane amount of issues, like between 12 and 15, but he handled all of them like amazingly. And I remember like, this is amazing. Like you pretty much really held down the fort and you prevented all these issues from like infecting the team, and you had great fixes for all of them. And so I wrote that all down and I CC'd his manager directly. He's like, this person deserves props. Yeah, and I was always happy to swap shifts. So whenever someone was like, oh, I'm going on PTO, I can't do on-call in like 4 weeks from now, can someone swap with me? Like generally people don't want to like go on call twice in a short period of time, but like since I owned this, right, I wanted to like really show how much I care about it and put myself on the line. So I was always the first to volunteer to swap shifts, because I was actually almost excited to be like on call, because again, it's like a noble thing to do, and it uplifts, it protects the team. Yeah, seeing the impact. So it was very obvious because you have like the meeting notes, like 95% plus of issues were resolved during the rotation, which means that SLA, service level agreement, how quickly you fix stuff, is less than 1 week. So, and that was not the case before. Yeah, and then I think the kind of crowning achievement here was a couple months after the on-call was shipped, we did this better engineering survey. The goal was to understand the health of engineering infra across the entire Instagram organization. It was split across stacks. So like Android, iOS, backend API, like ads delivery and ranking, ads, ML infra, they each got a survey, and everyone had to rate 10 engineering aspects, like in terms of quality. So it's like, how easy is it to write an automated test? How easy is it to like understand code? How easy is it to add new features? How good is documentation? Stuff like that. And one of those engineering aspects was, what's the quality of your on-call system? And after we did the survey, all the Android engineers voted, all the iOS engineers voted. On-call was the #1 healthiest engineering aspect of the organization by a wide margin. It almost had a perfect score. So it was 0 to 3. 0 was like crappy. 1 was like okay. 2 is good. And 3 is like amazing, pretty much can't be improved. Android got like a 2.8 or 2.9. For iOS, it was tied for #1. It got like 2.2 or 2.3. So yeah, I remember when that survey results came out, I was just super happy. Yeah, let's go through learnings. So I think a really big one, I've talked about this before, is that pain equals opportunity. And this is a big mindset shift that takes many engineers a long time to make. Generally mid-level to senior, that's when this really happens. And then it's required to go from senior to staff. So it's very easy to just complain and surrender because, that's just the way it is. Especially if you're in a big tech company, you're like, oh, like I'm in a big company and this problem's been around for a while, no one's fixed it. Like it's probably impossible. And that was kind of the case for me. I was like complaining about getting all these issues, and I suggested a very naive solution. It initially didn't occur to me to fix it at a systematic level, but I had a great manager, so she pushed me to do that, which I'm really grateful for. Yeah, flip the mentality. Like when you see this frustration, like in your engineering workflow, you should see it as a positive. Like every problem is solvable. The question is whether or not it's worth solving. You should never just like look at a problem and be like, it's just annoying. Like that's just the way it is. I think this is a very unhealthy mentality to have that really limits your growth. Yeah, like alleviating pain is like one of the most impactful and human things that you can do. And especially if you figure out how to do it at a multiplicative scale, then that's just how you really level up as an engineer and have like a broader presence in your organization. A lot of the case studies Rahul and I have given have like, show this. And like once you start like really championing this mentality, like the entire world changes. Like it's hard to describe. I describe it to my mentees as like the goggles. Like once you like really start understanding this and you get the goggles and you really start like seeing all the like kind of gold around you, and then you start evaluating everything of like, oh, like, is this like with the impact of the project is this, I can expand it in like these 5 different ways, right? And I feel like a lot of like L3s and L4s, the junior mid-level engineers, like they don't have the goggles and they're mainly just kind of doing what they're told, and like, they'll just be frustrated a lot of the time, be like, oh, I'm working on like a bad part of the code base. Their first instinct is like, can I work on a better part of the code base? Their first instinct is not like, how can I fix this crappy code and like just level it up, right? And I think that's a big mentality shift to make. Like again, every problem is solvable. Like code is very changeable. The question is it worth doing? And like once you make that mindset shift, like the world changes. Yeah, it's all about relationships. Talked about this before. If you want to be a senior engineer, tech lead, staff engineer, just some high engineering leadership, every person understands that you have to plant seeds that take a long time to grow. And that was the case for me. Like a big reason why I was able to like do all this is because I spent all this time cultivating these relationships beforehand. And I kind of like, they all paid dividends like when I was trying to like ship this thing and cash it all in. So yeah, no matter how hard humans try, like they can't be 100% objective. People are always going to lean towards people that they like. Like if someone likes you, they're more likely to agree with you. And I think this is just how it is. And I wouldn't have it any other way, right? It'd be weird if like all work was just like some mathematical equation and then like the mathematically best thing always wins and we're all like robots. That doesn't seem fun. Yeah, so like help others so they will one day help you in your time of need. Lead with kindness. And that was the case for me. I didn't really have to spend all that time like onboarding all these new engineers, but I just did it because #1, it just felt like the right thing to do. #2, I knew that like there was a good chance the social capital I was building would, pay off at some point, which it did. Yeah, understand everyone's incentives. So yeah, it's especially important with engineering managers. Like they're decision makers with a fundamentally different set of goals than you. And especially in order to be staff in particular, you're going to have to align multiple managers. So yeah, keep this in mind. So yeah, whenever you're in this, like I gotta align XFN type thing, the first instinct you should have is stop focusing on yourself. Figure out what drives other people and really ask, like, you don't don't ask them this directly, but you can ask like some, you be more like kind of subtle about it, but like, what do you care about when you're talking to someone else? Yeah, it's just an absolutely beautiful thing when incentives align. Yeah, stand on the shoulders of giants. So there are very few unsolved problems in tech due to the sheer amount of smart people in the industry. This is especially true at big tech companies. So there's always going to be someone who can teach you what you need to know. And so the problem reduces down to like communication and relationship building, which is like, how can I communicate my questions in a way where I can get the answers I want? And how can I build up the relationship with this person so they will be happy to sit down with me for an hour and walk me through the nuances of their system. And I think this is also like a big mindset shift, because I see a lot of people, they get worried. They're like, I need to learn this like big technical thing or learn this system. I have no idea like how it works. And they just get like really, really nervous and like panicked and scared. And I just think that's a bit of an unhealthy mentality to have, and it kind of limits you. Yeah, just like focusing on technology too much, on the tactics too much is just a big mistake I see among software engineers. So like once you kind of like make this mentality shift, and the problem just goes like, if you have like good people skills, you can more or less get any information or skill that you want, right? And this is especially true like if you work at a big FANG company like Meta, like any problem, like I guarantee you, any problem you're solving, there's going to be like 500 brilliant engineers who've already solved it. So your goal is just to like talk to them and get what you need. And that was the case for me. Like a lot of the on-call system was inspired by the already existing great on-calls within my organization. Yeah, lead by example. So like this is a big one. So like a lot of bad engineering leads, like managers, tech leads, senior staff engineers, they'll do this. Like they'll try to boss people around, and they'll be like, I want everyone to follow this process and do XYZ, and they're not really championing it themselves. So like you want to make others like want to carry out your vision instead of forcing them to do it. And that's more sustainable long term, because like if you're being forced to do something, like you're either going to do a crappy job or eventually just like churn out and like leave the team. Yeah, actions speak 100x louder than words. So yeah, strive for positive extremes, and you want people to react like, whoa, you did that. So like in my case, like the main thing that I really want to get across is like, I want the team to take fixing bugs like really seriously. Like you should be really like, you should almost be like honored to like protect the team and fix bugs and make sure that the user experience for the end user is like really, really good. So for me, like it was really important that I started off the on-call with a bang and write extremely detailed summaries on how I fix bugs and how I do it properly, and just like make sure that kind of mentality and knowledge propagates to the rest of the team. So like whenever anyone gets a bug, they try to do the right thing and get the right fix and figure out like how to improve the system overall if necessary. Yeah, like I've seen a lot of engineers fail this. Like a classic one back at Meta is like, I remember back like in my first year at Instagram, there were always like these engineers trying to spin up like automated testing efforts. And like they would be like, hey, let's increase test coverage for XYZ module. And then they would like, foist this work on other people. Like, hey, you own this, right? Like 20 automated tests. And like no one did it. And like I think the big problem was like they didn't really practice what they preach, because like they would only write like 5 or 10 automated tests themselves. Like, oh, this is like an example. You can use this as an example. But it's not really enough, right? That's not really a positive extreme. Writing 5 or 10 automated tests is like not that hard. And then I ended up doing this later. I was like, I'm going to pick up this automated testing thing and try to convince other people to write automated tests. Instead of writing 5 or 10 automated tests and then like shilling work to people, I wrote 100. So I wrote like some staggeringly huge amount of automated tests that like covered every single case. And then just like when you're on a good team, passion is infectious. So like I had much more success with my testing effort compared to the prior ones. And I think it's because leading by example was like the main way I did that. All right. Yeah, this is long. I had a lot of slides. This is a presentation I was really excited about. Apologies if people are bored. But yeah, it's time for questions. This is the end. Remember, this is all being recorded. So yeah, just keep that in mind. I'm happy to talk about aligning others, mechanics of on-call, just fixing bugs in general. And then in terms of how to ask your question, you can either do it in person, but again, just being recorded. So if you're comfortable having like your voice/space being visible, then go for it. Otherwise, you can just do it through Zoom chat. And if I can't get to your question, then you can just ask it in the Taro Q&A form afterwards, which is awesome. Highly recommend that people use it. I will stop sharing because like the UI gets weird when you're sharing. Okay, let me Do.
I have a question.
Oh yeah. Hey, what's up?
So you said it took 3 months from you, so like from November to February to get like, the whole process aligned. What percentage of your time did this thing take up, like setting up the process and the whole thing?
Yeah, it's a good question. It took me, I think it was like a 20% project. I think with like stuff like that, that's not your core roadmap work, 20% is a good place to be. Another thing that helped was I did a lot of this during the holidays because they start off in like November. So I had November and December and then like January. So most big companies will do a code freeze around the holiday season because like there's a big spike in revenue. So especially for like a consumer facing company like Facebook, a lot of ads gets sold during holiday season, so you can't push production code anyway. So this is the time to like do more like engineering infrastructure improvements, like revamping the on-call. So that helped a lot.
I have a question.
Hi.
And by the way, that was a great presentation. So thank you so much for sharing. So I want to ask you about the 1 week timeline that you guys have decided to go with. And I understand that, it improves, ownership and make sure it stays, with the SLA and stuff. But at the same time, wasn't it that kind of frustrating from the dev experience, especially when it comes to context switching? Like if you're working on something and then you have to, switch context for 1 week and then come back after a week, you could just like forget what you were working on and maybe take a day or two kind of to set your mind back to where you were a week ago. So I guess the question is, could you tell us about how this was, evaluated from the dev experience?
Yeah, I think context switching is it's definitely tough, right? Because like your life completely changes for 1 week. But I think like this is why the on-call size is very important. Like if the on-call is big enough, it's like a really crappy experience that happens pretty rarely. So if you have 10 engineers, it happens every 2.5 months. So it's kind of like you rip off a bandit every 2.5 months. But yeah, like to be frank, like if you're not great at context switching, then I think it's really hard to do well as an engineer. Because even within the on-call, you're context switching within that 1 week. So like you have to context switch from like not fixing bugs to fixing bugs. And then like every bug, like your bugs are going to be very different because like you own like every engineer when they're on call, they own this service area as owned by 10 other engineers. So like they could potentially get like 10 different issues across 10 different parts of the code base. But I think like there's a fundamental set of like debugging tactics you can use on pretty much anything. And it is like all in the same stack. So like you're only getting Android issues or iOS issues. So I think that kind of helped out. But yeah, it's like on-call is like, it's a noble sacrifice that people like have to make. Like you have one crappy week, but it's just like everyone pitches in, right? So like you have one crappy week, but then the other 9 or 10 weeks are pretty good because you're not on call.
Thank you.
All right, I think, let me see. I'm going to the questions in chat. Did the automated tests have a meaningful impact on your on-calls? Yeah, so what happened was as Instagram ads, code base, and feature set grew, we needed more automated tests because like just the surface area and complexity went up. And yeah, like it kind of, they feed into each other because we just noticed like a lot of issues were happening that just could have been caught with like a snapshot tester or something. So we were like, why are we not writing more of these? So like they kind of fed into each other. Like if an on-call, if there's like a series of bad on-calls, like rotations with like a ton of kind of obvious bugs that could have been prevented, then it kind of it raises the need for more automated tests. And then once you write the automated test, the on-calls become more smooth. So it's a nice like feedback loop. Did you allocate some sprint points for time spent on talking to engineers, leads, getting people on the same page? Was this in addition to your sprint tasks, completing features? What was the split in time spent for future work kind of activities? Did it all fit in a 40-hour work week? Yeah, great question. So most of Facebook doesn't follow a sprint model where you have like tasks and you have points actually. It might be a bit weird for some people. But yeah, Facebook was very free flow. You just kind of like we had tasks and we had timelines, but like aside from that, it wasn't super structured. So I didn't like allocate points. I was just like, I'm just gonna like just work on it with like roughly 10 and 20% of my time. It wasn't super structured. I personally like enjoy like those non-structured, more kind of free flow chaotic environments. So it was fine. Did it fit inside 40-hour work week? Yeah, it fit pretty cleanly actually. The bulk of the work was just like sharpening the proposal and getting alignment. I did a lot of that in like the holiday time, like around the holiday season. So I had a lot of time to like write docs and like not write code anyways. And like, yeah, like by like early to mid January, the proposal was really good. So there was just like a 2-3 week period where everyone was just like waiting and they're just getting the stragglers of like, hey, if you haven't read this, like, please read it. It's going to happen. Are you able to manage time effectively, or do you also work on holidays to complete this? I didn't work on, I don't work holidays. Yeah, I feel like I am able to manage time effectively. I actually had pretty good work-life balance at Meta. It took a lot of effort to get there. A lot of things went into that. It's probably like an entire session on its own. Maybe I'll have an office hours about it. But I've pretty much never worked weekends or holidays. Maybe like 5% of the time. So like 95+% of the time, I'm working like a standard 40-hour work week. Yeah, even as like a high performer tech lead. I have a question. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. Actually, two things. So, the first one is, you may have said this, but I don't lately. So was there a handoff process part of the on-call process? And then the second question is, I know like this process seems great and it got good scoring, but was there any pain points that you can share with us? Would like to kind of know.
Yeah, I think handoff was essentially just the weekly meeting. There wasn't a huge need for handoff. So if your on-call has rollover, then you definitely need handoff, because the on-call is like, I'm going to roll over these issues to you, and here's the context I have on them. But we didn't have rollover. So like we didn't really need as big of a formal handoff. So it's just like the on-call meeting and the entire team meets up. In terms of pain points of the on-call, it was, so what happened in the beginning was like, again, like you are forced, you are the buck stops with you. So you are responsible for learning other parts of the code base to like fix the issue. And like in the beginning, since like our team was more fractured and had all these single points of failure, in the beginning, there was a lot of teaching that had to happen. But I made that clear. I was like, if the on-call needs your help to understand the system because they have a bug in your system, you should help them and explain it to them. I mean, you don't have to fix the entire bug, but like you should walk them through like how their system works and how to debug it. So there was a lot of teaching that happened because like people would run into issues and it's like, I've never worked with this code base before. I've spent 30 minutes on it. I'm stuck. But it got better over time, right? Because it's like the teaching, like everyone starts leveling up and like knowing how things work. And we kept building up this like bigger and bigger arsenal of like detailed meeting notes and essentially guides on how to debug every part of the code base. So that corrected itself over 3 months, and like the team became like way more resilient. So that was good. But yeah, like the beginning part was like oftentimes is the hardest because you have like these growing pains. Okay. If you have a very overwhelming on-call and not able to close everything in 1 week, then this is going to spill into your after on-call week, which is dev work week. Did you face such issue? How do you suggest handling it? Yeah, I think there's a couple things here. Number one, if it's just like super, super overwhelming and you get like 10 issues on one day, that is what the shout out on call is for. And then number two, this ideally should like never happen, because if you have that many issues, it means that like your system is like really terrible. So like in that on-call meeting, you should definitely be talking about like, why are there a billion issues? There's probably some systematic like improvement we can make to prevent this from happening again. So that's pretty much like how we handled it, which is like proactively prevent this from ever happening by like writing good systems. And then if it does, the shadow on call will like support you. And then the team should come together to prevent it from ever happening again. But yeah, this was like, this actually pretty much like never happened. Like there was one case, like when I was talking about my mentee, they got a bunch of issues, but they were able to like pretty much close them all out within the week. Something that we always did with every on-call is in the meeting notes, in the retro, we would have a number, which is like, what % of my bandwidth did it take for this week to just be on call? So it's like it was 50%, that means I spent 50% of my 40 hours this week, like, you know, fixing stuff, 50% doing roadmap work. And then if it was like 100%, that means you were completely solved with on-call. And it was as low as like 0 or 5% sometimes. Cause like if your on-call is good, the number of issues should trend down over time because you're like systematically fixing things and you have good engineering culture. So the average percent spent on-call was like maybe like 30, 35, like pretty manageable. Okay, session about how I manage time for sure. For new features, were the engineers who worked on it responsible for writing good docs up front or support the on-call when their feature first went live? How did you prevent new features being built and being thrown over the fence for the on-call to fix? That's a good question. So I don't really believe in like writing documentation up front. I don't believe in wikis where it's like, this is how the code works. Because they get outdated like really, really fast. Yeah, generally like when your thing goes live, you are like meant to support it. So that is like a bit of a carve out, but like after the feature stabilizes, it'll get rolled up into the on-call. How do you prevent new features being built and being thrown over the fence for the on-call to fix? Yeah, it's just kind of like expected, because when you like launch a new feature, like first of all, I think the incentives do a lot here. Like if you launch a new feature and like you're not the one protecting that feature when it goes out, you just look really terrible, and that's gonna like nerf your performance review. And if there's like the main motivating force at Meta and FANG companies in general is the performance review. So like I didn't really have to do much there, to be honest, because like the performance review and the optics like enforced a lot of that for me. What tool do you use to structure the runbook so easy to digest? I think just good technical writing. We have an internal wiki tool at Meta. I just made sure it had like bullet points and diagrams and clear sections and stuff, and more or less did well. A session on writing docs/proposals will be awesome. Yeah, I recommend my system design series where I have a very detailed document walking through like my system design. I generally use that format for everything. There's a lot of sections in the that are useful for any doc. Doesn't matter if it's a technical system or like a process people-oriented system like on-call. Like you need to have the context and the stakeholders and timeline and stuff like that. Those are pretty much evergreen. And yeah, join promotions at FYI, as Rahul mentioned. Okay, yeah, it's been an hour now. My voice is getting hoarse. Yeah, thanks everyone for coming. It's really appreciated. Nerding out on on-call, and yeah, it's hopefully folks learn something. On-call is seriously so important. I learned how important on-call is revamping going through all this and really leveling up the completely crap on-call I had. So like if you guys are on like, you know, if you're on a team that's like bigger and has on-call, you should look at it and see how it can be improved, because it's seriously a huge quality of life difference, like when a team has a good on-call versus a bad on-call. But yeah, I'll see everyone later. Thanks for coming again.
Can I say one quick thing, Alex?
Oh yeah, go for it.
All right. So for one thing that I am curious, but it's unrelated, so feel free to log off. But if people have signed up for the promotions FYI waitlist, I'm actually really interested to hear about what people are looking for in the actual product when we launch it in the next couple of weeks. So Alex and I and Charlie, we're working on it every day, and we want to make sure it's good. And so no need to answer me now, but if you have thoughts on, hey, here's what I'm looking for to make promotions FYI actually very valuable, could you please send me a message on the Taro Premium Slack? Send me an Alex message. I'd love just to kind of make sure that we're delivering what we promise or what the perceived promise is. Okay, that's all I wanted to say. Thanks, everyone.